Okay, guys, we are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are kicking off a series of webinars on coordinated enrollment, so we hope to be following up with some upcoming webinars in the next few months over the course of the summer. This first webinar is going to address the first section of your coordinated enrollment plan, which is maximize system capacity. So today, really our objective is to clarify section 1 for you. In reviewing all of the coordinated enrollment plans that were submitted this year, we noticed trends in that first section where folks were having some challenges both completing those tables that have numbers and calculations in them, as well as really identifying strategies to maximize the capacity of your enrollment systems. And so today, we're going to go over the early childhood vision. We're going to provide an overview of coordinated enrollment. And then we're going to really dig into that maximize system capacity section. So we'll talk about the purpose of that section. We'll practice the calculations that you're required to do in that section. We will then talk about strategies to maximize system capacity that you can actually begin using. And then we'll give an overview of available funding sources. At the end, assuming that there's time, we hope to allow some opportunities for questions, and we'll also give you some next steps. Okay, so before we get started and jump into coordinated enrollment, we wanted to put the early childhood vision in front of you. Obviously, this is nothing new. This is a slide you all have seen many times before, but we just want to remind you that as a part of the Act 3 vision, coordinated enrollment has always been central to achieving this vision. So if you look at these 4 sections of the vision, there's shared high standards for what children should learn and what excellent teaching looks like. There's expectations for health, safety, and learning that are consistent with adequate funding levels. There's teachers are excellent at interacting with children. But then the 4th bucket is that families can easily enroll and choose the best option for their children. And that is really what coordinated enrollment is all about. So we just wanted to kick it off and remind you that this is really important work and that it's absolutely embedded in the overall vision for early childhood in our state. Okay, so talking about more specifically what the vision for coordinated enrollment is and what it has been, I just want to first congratulate everyone on the phone and sort of celebrate the fact that we as a state have made considerable progress since 2012. So we know that communities all across the state are really coordinating their processes so that more families are able to learn about early childhood offerings and enroll their children in programs. We also know that all early childhood programs are held to the same standards through our quality rating system, and information about that quality is provided to families. More children, because of these efforts, are able to access high quality care and education, which is awesome. However, we also know that more work needs to be done to maximize capacity and to address gaps in access. So we think the next iteration of coordinated enrollment really has to address the fact that we know kids across the state are still not accessing care and education at the rate that they should be. Partly this is a funding challenge, but we think there's also ways to address it through coordination. We also want to remind you why this matters. So coordinated enrollment is really important, and we see that across the state, it's doing absolutely incredible things for families and children. When communities are successfully coordinating, we know that families can easily learn about all available seats. They have an easier touch point with a person or the organization in the community through which they enroll. And ultimately, more children are able to access spots. When communities are not coordinated, families may not have a primary contact. Families may be placed on a wait list for one seat while another seat goes unfilled, and it may be difficult for community networks to measure true demand and actually plan according to that demand. So as a part of the coordinated enrollment requirements or expectations for communities, we as a state have said that community networks are required to first count all at-risk publicly funded children. So that's the October 1 child count. We also say that community networks must submit a coordinated funding request. And then lastly, and what we're going to focus mostly on today, is that communities must submit a coordinated enrollment plan. So as I mentioned before, now we're going to really dig into what that coordinated enrollment plan entails and what that first section of the plan is asking communities to do. And hopefully we'll be able to give you some key tips and strategies to improve that section of your plan moving forward. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Amanda, who will take us through the next few slides.
Hi, everyone. So looking at this slide, you can see that there are 4 components to the coordinated enrollment plan. And this was established with the Louisiana State Legislature, and it was defined with Act 717, 2014. It required our communities to have 4 components. It started with Section 1, a coordinated information, where that way families have knowledge of all available seats. The second component was coordinating the eligibility process, so families know what programs are available and what they qualify for. The third component is the coordinated application process. So they have one application, making it easier for families. And then the last component is matching based on family preference. So families can enroll their child in the highest ranked preference available. So now we're going to really focus and hone in on maximize system capacity. This is the Section 1 of your coordinated enrollment plan. So you can see that it has a couple of tables in there, and we're going to really focus in on the first one. But before we do that, I kind of want to talk about the purpose. What is maximize system capacity? It means to increase access for our children in the state in the early childhood programs. For us to do that, our community networks really need to understand where the access is limited in your community, and then think strategically to find solutions that will maximize the capacity in the current systems already in place. So while you're doing that, networks will be considering a couple of different things. Like you're going to be analyzing the available information to determine the community's family demand. You're going to be considering that sometimes at-risk need for early childhood programs may be greater than the family demand captured by applications and waitlist information. You'll also consider the information of the children that are already enrolled in programs. You're going to analyze your network capacity to serve the children at every single age level, birth to 5. Creatively investigating and really analyzing all the different funding opportunities so that you can maximize capacity so that children are receiving services within your network. And be creative in the ways that you can braid funding sources and be even more efficient in the existing funding sources you already have available. And even possibly reaching out to your community partners so that you can utilize other available funding sources so that you can increase access. But I guess the biggest point is that we really just want to be intentional and strategic with the arrangements so that you can provide the most opportunities for our children in our state. All right, as we do this, and as you're considering all this information, there's so much data that we use to make these decisions, but I want us to kind of consider some of it very specifically. Like, for example, using your pre-K and kindergarten cohort information can help you make predictions on how to support your network's English learners, and it can even help you make predictions about meeting the needs for your children with disabilities. These data can also help with networks plan for seats for the economically disadvantaged populations in your network too. Even learning about how your parish, the population, the growth and decline can help you with the planning process for early childhood. Also understanding about families in transition and your migrant workers. These trends are also powerful information that you can use to plan as well. One of them is the census. You can utilize this information easily. I was looking on that particular site and noticed that one particular network had 52% internet usage, and that's great information to use to be able to drive your information campaign in that particular network. So just gathering all your information, reassessing how to use this data to be strategic in your planning can help increase access for your children. All right, so let's look at this data table, and we're going to dive into each component and each column real quick.
So I just want to say before Amanda jumps in, if you happen to have your coordinated enrollment plan with you, it may be a good idea to pull it up if you're on two screens and you have, that's okay. If you have two screens, you could pull it up on one screen and follow along on the other, or if you have a paper version, it might be a good idea. That's absolutely not necessary, so if you don't have it, don't worry about it, but we're really going to be walking through step by step how to do these calculations in a few slides from now, so it may be helpful if you do have your plan to reference it.
Okay, so looking at this first table, this table in the section 1 of your enrollment plan is really asking networks to calculate the demand and calculate the need, the at-risk need for early childhood services in your community, but it also gives you two calculation columns that tell you how well the community network is meeting the demand and the need in your area. So the at-risk cohort, this particular column is a number that is provided to each network by the department. It's an estimate. It estimates the number of economically disadvantaged children in the community. We call it the at-risk cohort. It's estimated of children in the age group based on the size of the kindergarten cohort at or below the 200% federal poverty line. This number is used to estimate the potential need for services in this community. Historically, in 2013-14, this number came from the network's free and reduced lunch number, but over time it's changed, and we have a more comprehensive definition. But basically, it's families who live in your network and meet certain income requirements and are eligible for pre-K. So family demand is the next column, and this is the number of families that have applied and are completing applications in your network. It's the number of families who have stepped up and said they wanted services by applying for services. This number should include the number currently in seats and the number on wait list. It would automatically include wait lists because the families on wait lists have already completed application process, but maybe not have been provided the seat as of yet. This number represents who actually have applied for services, but it may not necessarily capture who want or need services, which is one of the reasons why we provide that at-risk cohort.
So basically, just to clarify or to add something to that, your family demand may be much smaller than your at-risk cohort because fewer families are applying for services. So we provide both sets of information, or we expect you to provide both sets of information, I should say, both the number that is a higher number, your at-risk cohort number, that's the potential need for services based on their economic information of those families and households, compared to your family demand, which are the families that have actually submitted applications. You want to be very careful in your family demand and the processes you have in place in order to count these numbers, because what you don't want to do is duplicate children in this count. So for example, if a family is interested in learning about pre-K seats as well as 4-year-old classrooms in childcare centers or Head Start. If they're applying for multiple programs in your community, you should only be counting them on this in this column one time. So these should be representations of the number of children who are interested in seats, not necessarily the total number of applications if you don't already have one unified application process.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so looking at your service number, this number is the actual number of students who are receiving services are in seats. This number is children who are currently enrolled in all publicly funded early childhood programs in your community. And it should match your October 1 count. This is pretty straightforward. You'll have that in October 1st. All right, so in this column, the service based on demand is our first calculation. This will determine the percent of children whose families have applied for services and that are currently being served in a program. This percent indicates how well a community is meeting a family demand. The percent of children whose families applied and are being served, that's what this percent will tell us. And the last column is services based on the at-risk need. It goes back to that at-risk cohort number that we were given at the beginning. This service based on need is a percent of the estimated economically disadvantaged children that are currently being served. These percents indicate how well the community is meeting the potential at-risk need for services. All right, so we're gonna practice a calculation and we're gonna really hone in on the threes. You can see we kind of highlighted it in purple. And we're gonna just go step by step. All right, for step one, we're going to look at and pull out the number from the service column. It's based on your October 1st count to take the number being served. This is 506 students that are enrolled and being served in a seat by October 1st. For step two is divide by the family demand. This is the number of families who have applied for services within your network. And then finally, input the service based on the demand. So we have 68%. So basically, this tells us that in this community, 68% of the 3-year-olds whose families have applied for the publicly funded early childhood programs were actually enrolled in seats. But then it also gives us information on the gap, which is 32% were not.
And that 32%, we're just making an inference because 68% were. So we know that tells us that if 68% were enrolled in seats, 32% were not, which is the gap between your family demand and your service.
That's right, Taylor. Okay, so looking at that last column, service based on need. So now we're going back to the at-risk cohort number. This is where we're going to focus again on our number, our 3-year-olds. So we're going to take the 506, and this is how many students are currently enrolled in a program. We're going to take the at-risk cohort number, which is our at-risk based on the kindergarten cohort given to you at the beginning by the department, divide it, and then we get our 28%. So what this is telling us that in this community, 28% of the estimated at-risk 3-year-olds were enrolled in seats, and then 72% were not. All right, so now there's one more table that we really kind of want to focus on real quick, and then that is the very last table in section 1. This one has the target service percent. So we're going to spend the next few slides on strategies to serve more children, and this data table will kind of start that. This slide has the calculations that require some thinking about how you propose your network, how your network kind of proposes potentially to serve more children. So can you kind of bring the mouse right there?
Sure.
Yeah. So that proposed service number, every network determines that number individually in their own unique way. How you might propose that number is different per every network. So this number is developed, and once after you have figured out how you're developing this number, once through the planning process you have identified that number, you take this number. So say we're working with the same network and we're just kind of extending that table. So there's still working with the 3-year-olds. The number proposed is 585 for the next upcoming year, students to be enrolled. And we still have the at-risk cohort being 1,796 at-risk students. And the percent being served, or the target percent proposed to be served, is 32%. So basically it's stating that this target percent tells us that the community's goal is to provide publicly funded program services to 32% of the families, expanding services by about 4% to families as compared to the previous year of 28%.
Great. So hopefully going through each of those calculations was helpful. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll hopefully leave some room for questions. So if you have questions about any of those tables or you don't understand it, hopefully we'll be able to address them today. And if not, we'll leave you with a slide that has Amanda's email address, so you can feel free to reach out to her with any questions. Now we're going to move on to a section. We're just going to go through a few slides that really focus on different strategies that we've actually seen work across the state, where networks have improved their access by maximizing the capacity of their system. So we're just going to share some of those strategies with you today. Great. So as Amanda just said, it's really critical that community networks be planning for how they will expand access in that target percent served column in the last table that we looked at. And so here are some strategies for how you could actually approach that and maximize the capacity of your system and reach more kids and more families. So one strategy that we've seen work is simply identifying inefficiencies and correcting those inefficiencies. So in thinking about whether or not this strategy might work in your community, you should be asking yourself, are there system inefficiencies that prevent the maximum amount of children from being enrolled in seats? So for example, we've seen Calcasieu Parish do this effectively. Calcasieu identified inefficiencies with empty LA4 seats and unused Title I monies. Then they re-examined their funding streams for more efficient methods to prevent unfilled seats. So they identified that LA4 seats were going unfilled while they were maxing out on other funding streams. So they were able to restructure their funding such that they were maxing out those LA4 seats and making sure that every dollar was being spent. Another strategy that may work for you is thinking about moving seats geographically. So a question you should be asking is, are there localities, zip codes, areas of your parish of particular need? And is there a way for you to move more funding and more seats to that area so that you're able to reach more families? We know, especially with families with young children, that transportation is a really big challenge. So if there are particular areas of your parish where there aren't services, where there aren't available seats, but there are a lot of families in need, you may start thinking about strategies for moving seats to where the families are. So for example, Washington Parish did this successfully. Washington Parish Lead Agency has collaborated with the local Head Start in order to place an additional Head Start classroom in a school in a region of Washington that needed another classroom. Tangipahoa has also done something like this. They located a school-based pre-K classroom in child care centers in areas where they don't have schools. so they can provide more pre-K services in those regions of TNG. A couple more strategies to expand access. The first one is improving community coordination. So this seems simple, but we know that this involves a lot of relationship building and possibly local politicking and really leveraging the relationships that you have built. But you should be asking yourself, can you as a network coordinate your efforts to reduce the burdens placed on families in order to reach the greatest number of children? So for example, are there providers who can serve different ages and other providers that cannot? An example of this is Caldwell. Caldwell strategically uses Head Start seats to serve 3-year-olds because there are already sufficient numbers of 4-year-old seats through other funding sources. So instead of having several 4-year-old Head Start classrooms, they're serving 4-year-olds through their other funding sources, so they're maximizing the number of 3-year-olds that can be served through Head Start. Another strategy, and I feel like this is a buzzword that we always hear, but it truly is a strategy to expand access, is braiding funds. Of course, you know that means that we're combining multiple funding sources to fund a particular classroom or site. So are there ways for you to combine and braid funds to maximize the number of seats in classrooms at your schools or centers? For example, Sabine does this. Sabine braids Head Start funds so that everyone benefits from the wraparound services and resources that Head Start provides. Another strategy is allocating local funding and actually fundraising at the local level. So a question we would really like you to start asking yourselves is, are there ways for you as a community to fundraise locally to serve even more children in your community? This is not an easy task, and we recognize that, but there are examples of this happening across the state. So for example, Noween actually secured funding through the New Orleans Mayor's Office, which funded an additional 50+ pre-K seats in Orleans Parish. And the last strategy that we're going to leave you with today is reverse mainstreaming. So the question you can ask yourself is, can you serve more children by placing regular education kids in reverse mainstream classrooms? So in addition to braiding LA4, 8G, Title I, and local funds, Terrebonne uses reverse mainstreaming to serve more children. So this is a strategy that has worked in Terrebonne. So after going through all those strategies, we really just want to emphasize that this is really important work. We know sitting here in Baton Rouge, this is not easy work. We know it's very challenging, but we also know it's incredibly important. So when capacity is maximized, we know that hard-fought dollars are used as efficiently as possible. Seats don't go unfilled, and funding does not go unspent. So that goes back to that efficiency. As many children as possible are in high quality seats. Families have convenient and affordable options. And more children are prepared to enter kindergarten ready to succeed, which is ultimately our goal. When capacity is not being maximized, some things we may see include funding may not be used as efficiently as possible. Seats may go unfilled. Families may be placed on multiple wait lists, which is confusing and may lead to gaps or duplications in service. Certain localities in your community may be left without any options. Lack of coordination may result in a surplus of seats for one age group, but a lack of seats for another age group. And fewer children have experiences in their early childhood that prepare them for success in school. We just wanted to share with you all of the available funding sources possibly at your disposal. So over the course of the next few months, we're going to be doing more work to really be sure that you're clear on what funding is available to you. And if you have any questions about the available funding sources, we'll be able to answer them. But I did just want to show you this chart You may want to take a photo of it as it's on the screen now if this is not information that you already are familiar with. But if you look across this table, you can see which of the funding sources serves which age group. So looking across the top row where it says the P-Card Early Childhood Program, or LA4, you can see that there's an X in the fours column. So that means that that funding source is only available for 4-year-olds. Whereas if you go one down, the Child Care Assistance Program is available to infants through 4-year-olds. So this is just informational. There's no ask here now, but we want to make sure that you have this information. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda, and she's going to wrap us up with next steps, and then it does look like we'll have some time for questions.
Okay, so in preparing for your coordinated enrollment in your upcoming planning year, I'd like for you to be thinking about identifying ways that you can, in your community, maximize capacity and expand access for our kids. So our goal is, or our hope is, that you re-examine the calculations in your section 1 of your enrollment plan and possibly determine and identify one or more of some of these strategies that can help expand the access for your upcoming year. And moving forward, continue to plan for this maximizing capacity, and then identify these strategies for this 2019-2020 coordinated funding request and your enrollment planning process. So we're gonna kind of open up for some questions, and if you are ready for some questions. I can unmute them.
Okay, so what we'll do, if anyone has any questions, you can either type your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can ask your question over the audio. Great, so we have a question that is in the chat box. So the question is, when considering migrant families to determine need, isn't it correct that migrant families are not automatically eligible for programs? And that is correct. So migrant families, unless they are homeless or those kids are involved in the foster care system, they're not automatically eligible. However, we do see some networks where they have a predicted migrant population, maybe seasonal workers or something like that, where they are trying to target those families intentionally in their informational campaign and through other strategies. So that's just something to keep in mind, but you're absolutely right. Those families are not necessarily automatically eligible.
But strategic planning for them is great.
Yes, absolutely. We'll stay on for a few more minutes. So if any other questions come up, please go ahead and enter them into the chat box. Otherwise, as you can see on this slide, if you have any questions about this, either about your particular plan or coordinated enrollment more broadly, feel free to reach out to Amanda. Here's her email address and her direct phone line that's on this slide. But we'll stay on the line for a few more minutes, so if you have any more questions, we'll be here to answer them. Okay, y'all, thank you again for joining. It seems like there are no more questions at this time, so we'll go ahead and end the webinar, give you 20 minutes back in your day. But like I mentioned, please do not hesitate to reach out with questions, and you can expect some upcoming communications around next steps regarding coordinated enrollment moving forward. Thank you so much. Have a good day.